All right, let's dive into Sun Records.
Yeah.
Sun Records, this legendary label that really,
Shaped rock and roll.
shaped the sound of rock and roll. And we're going to...
Head to Memphis.
We're heading to Memphis, Tennessee. Back in the 1950s, when it was really kind of the center of this musical energy, it was a melting pot.
Absolutely. This small storefront
At 706 Union Avenue.
706 Union Avenue became like a musical crucible, right?
It did, yeah.
All this talent coming together.
Yeah, and we've got all these articles, we've got historical accounts, and we're really going to try to figure out...
What made Sun Records so special?
Yeah, what made it so special? Why did so many iconic artists come out of this one place?
Well, it starts with Sam Phillips, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't just a producer.
He was a visionary.
He was a visionary.
Yeah.
He really believed in just raw, authentic sound.
And he had a background in radio, right?
Yeah, he's a radio engineer. But then he moved into being a record label entrepreneur.
And he had this motto, which I just love.
We record anything, anywhere, anytime.
I mean, how cool is that?
It speaks to just this radical openness, especially for the time.
Yeah, and that drew in so much different talent, right?
Well, bluesmen, gospel singers, country crooners. I mean, he wasn't tied to any one genre.
And this was all happening in the segregated South, right?
Yeah.
When there were all these, barriers between races.
Racial barriers were firmly in place.
Yeah, so it seems almost defiant, like he was really trying to push against that.
It was actively seeking to break down those barriers, yeah.
And there's that quote from him,
You know what he was searching for?
a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel.
Which obviously has sparked a lot of debate over the years.
Yeah. And we'll get into that.
Yeah.
We'll get into that a little bit later, but I think
Absolutely.
for now, let's talk about the music.
Let's talk about the music.
Because there's always this debate about like the first rock and roll record, and Sun Records is really right there in the center of it.
Oh, yeah, 1951.
Yeah.
Sun recorded Rocket 88
Rocket 80s.
by Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats.
Oh, yeah, and that band
A young Ike Turner
had Ike Turner.
on guitar.
Yeah.
And they had those distorted guitar sounds.
That was just from a damaged amp, right?
Most likely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, so many people think that's like,
The first true rock and roll riffs.
yeah, it's so raw.
It's raw. It's energetic.
It's just this explosion of energy.
Totally different from like the polished pop music
At the time.
that was out there.
Yeah, you can almost feel like the shift
A
happening.
new genre is born.
Something new, yeah, something rebellious.
And then a few years later, this young truck driver,
Elvis,
Presley, walks into Sun Records.
and he just wants to make a record for his mom.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? It's hard to even picture Elvis.
As anything but a sensation.
Yeah, as anything B.O.T., but
But I heard that he didn't impress Phillips at first.
no, it was actually Marian Keisker,
The receptionist.
the receptionist, who was like,
Good ballad singer. Hold.
what an ear.
Talk about a keen ear for talent.
Can you imagine if she
It's
hadn't?
mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling. Like, what if he had just walked away?
But thankfully, she did notice him.
And then Phillips eventually gave him a chance.
In 1954 late-night jam session,
That's all right, Mama.
Blue Moon of Kentucky,
Those recordings.
like nothing anyone had heard before.
The energy, the mix of country, blues, and gospel.
That's the iconic Sun sound.
Yeah.
And you can't forget that slapback echo
Oh, the slapback echo.
that Phillips was using. It adds this really cool, texture.
It wasn't just the mix of genres, but it was like the rawness
The passion.
and like this breaking free from, all the conventions of the time.
Totally.
And I think people were really ready for something different, right?
Absolutely. We're hungry for something new and exciting.
I think that's what they got.
Yeah.
And then
And then Elvis's success led the way for all these other
Yeah.
incredible talents.
Johnny Cash,
The Man in Black.
the man in black himself.
Yeah. I mean, his voice
So decent.
so deep, resonant.
And those stories
Those tales of heartache.
of heartache and redemption, I mean, it spoke to so many people.
Absolutely. I mean, his first single with Sun, Cry, Cry, Cry,
Mm-hmm.
was a top 15 country hit.
Yeah.
And it really showcased, his ability to connect with people.
Emotionally,
Emotionally, yeah.
it felt so real, like he was singing
Directly to you.
directly to you, like sharing those stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh, the killer.
The killer. He brought this wild energy.
Yeah, untamed energy to Sun, his piano playing incendiary. And he just had this electric stage presence
Oh, yeah.
and a whole lot of shaking going on.
Massive hit.
It was huge. It really captured like that rebellious spirit of rock and roll.
Yeah, yeah. He became an icon, you know, a
Yeah.
true pioneer.
And Sun Records, they just had this knack, right, for finding these artists.
Pushing boundaries.
Yeah, who were pushing boundaries, musically and culturally. That's right. They weren't afraid to be different, to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
You know, create music that spoke to a generation that was just yearning for something more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They were forces of nature, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's amazing. It's like Sun's impact went beyond, you know, just those individual careers.
Yeah, I mean, they helped to create this whole new sound, right?
Yeah.
This fusion of country, blues, and gospel.
Rockabilly.
Rockabilly.
Yeah, that raw energy, that rebellious spirit that set it apart from everything that was out there.
Yeah, it spoke to, you know, the youth.
Yeah.
Their desire for something different, something that reflected
Their energy.
their energy.
Yeah. And we have to remember, like, the context of all this.
This was the segregated South.
The segregated South.
And Sun Records, with
Yeah.
this diverse roster of artists,
Yeah.
really played a role in challenging those barriers.
Yeah. And Phillips' vision of, like, music transcending race, it was pretty progressive
It was.
for the time. But, you know, that quote about finding a white man with the Negro sound,
It sparked a lot of discussion over the years.
it has. I mean, there are valid arguments on both sides, I think.
There are.
Some people see it as exploitative, and others believe that he genuinely wanted to
Bridge the racial divide.
bridge the racial divide, yeah, in music.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth considering, you know, what impact it had in bringing Black music to a wider audience.
For sure, for sure.
Oh, and we can't forget Carl Perkins,
The king of rockabilly.
the king of rockabilly, blue suede shoes.
Classic example of the Sun sound.
It's such an anthem, but it's interesting it never actually reached #1.
It's true. Elvis's cover actually charted higher.
That's so wild.
It is.
But I mean, Perkins' original is just,
the definitive version for many.
yeah, it really captures that energy, that swagger of rockabilly.
Totally.
And then Sun Records also, they launched the career of Roy Orbison,
The Big O.
the Big O, known for that powerful operatic voice.
Yeah. He had this haunting emotional quality to his music.
Yes.
Yeah. He brought a different kind of intensity
Yeah.
to Sun Records. You know, blending rock and roll with, like, country
Yeah.
and pop influences.
Yeah, and like Only the Lonely, crying. I mean, you could hear that incredible vocal range
Oh, yeah.
and just the emotion in his voice.
Absolutely.
It's amazing to think about, like, how much talent was in that one little studio.
I know. In that one spot in Memphis.
And speaking of amazing, we have to talk about the Million Dollar Quartet.
Oh, gotta talk about it.
It's the stuff of legends.
1950s.
This impromptu jam session.
with Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash.
Take a snapshot of that creative energy.
Yeah, imagine being a fly on the wall
Oh, I know.
in that room. 4 icons of music.
Just jamming together, playing for the joy of it.
Perkins was recording, Lewis was on piano, Elvis dropped by.
And Cash joined in.
It's this spontaneous explosion of musical brilliance,
And thankfully, Sam Phillips was like, hey, we need to document this.
called the local newspaper photographer.
Yeah. I mean, those photos are iconic.
They are.
Yeah, they really give you a glimpse into that moment.
Into this magical moment in music history.
It really speaks to the atmosphere that Phillips cultivated at Sun, right?
Oh, absolutely. He created a space where these artists felt comfortable experimenting, collaborating,
Yeah.
and just letting the music flow.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the artists. I mean, Phillips himself
Oh, no, he was
was a master of sound. I mean, he could capture the raw energy
Absolutely.
and translate it into a record.
And he didn't have, you know, all the fancy equipment. He
Right.
was working with limited resources,
Right.
but he had a deep understanding of sound
Yeah.
acoustics.
And he wasn't afraid to experiment.
Not at all. I mean, we talked about the slapback echo.
Oh, yeah. How did that work?
Well, it was relatively simple, but it had a huge impact on the sound. You
Right.
know, he would record the instrument or the voice in
Mm.
the studio, and then he'd play it back through a speaker in a different room. And he would record that delayed signal along with the original.
So like an artificial echo.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that really gave those recordings
Yeah, a distinctive depth.
a depth, yeah, an ambience.
An ambience.
You can hear it on those early Elvis recordings.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the sound is bouncing off the walls.
Yeah, it enhances that rawness,
Yeah.
immediacy.
It adds to the excitement of the music.
Phillips a true innovator,
Yeah.
a sonic architect.
Really shook the sound of a generation.
And he understood that the way you record music can be just as important
Yeah.
as the music itself.
It's amazing to think about how those techniques developed in Memphis influenced music
For decades.
for decades to come. It's a testament to his ingenuity,
Oh, yeah.
to his willingness to push boundaries.
He was a visionary.
Mm.
He recognized that, the future of music was in capturing that raw energy,
Yeah.
that emotion, not sterile perfection.
And that vision, it still resonates today, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, the music that was born at Sun,
Yeah.
It's timeless. It continues to inspire generations of musicians and fans.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a powerful reminder, like that true innovation.
Can come from the most unexpected places.
Absolutely.
From those who are willing to,
Break the rule.
break the rules, and follow their passion.
We've talked about the artist, the sound, the cultural impact.
Mhm.
But what happened to Sun Records after all that?
Well, in '69, Sam Phillips decided to sell the label.
Oh, wow.
And a Nashville producer, Shelby Singleton, he bought it
Okay.
and moved the whole operation to Nashville. He kept putting out those classic Sun recordings.
Yeah.
But the label, it never really got back to what it was.
We lost that magic, huh?
It seems like it. Hard to recapture that lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, yeah.
But, the spirit of Sun Records, it lived on.
And that original studio in Memphis?
They actually restored it, reopened it in the 80s.
Oh, wow.
It's a museum and a recording studio.
Deadly.
To this day, people come from all over the world.
It's like a pilgrimage.
It is. To stand in that room where Elvis, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins,
It's incredible.
it's the tangible connection to that moment in music history.
And to think, that little storefront studio, it was almost demolished.
Almost gone.
And now it's a National Historic Landmark.
It shows you the power of that music.
Yeah, Sun Records, it was more than just a business.
It was a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
It shaped the sound of rock and roll, and it keeps inspiring new generations.
And that influence, it goes way beyond the walls of that studio.
Absolutely. The artists, the sound, it reverberated through popular music.
For decades.
For decades, shaping genres from rockabilly to country to rock and roll.
That raw energy, the rebellious spirit, the way they mix genres, it's still relevant.
It is. You can hear it in so many artists today,
Yeah.
inspired by those Sun Records pioneers.
What stands out to you most about Sun Records? Like, what's the big takeaway?
I think it's that reminder that innovation can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
Sun was this tiny studio in Memphis, far from New York or LA.
Right.
But it was there that a musical revolution started.
You don't need fancy equipment, big budget,
You need passion, vision,
courage to break the rules.
and be open to the unexpected.
Yeah, Sam Phillips, he wasn't trying to create rock and roll.
He just followed his gut, trusted his ear, and made a space for creativity.
Powerful art from humble beginnings, right?
That's Sun Records.
It's a story about music breaking down barriers, challenging the norm, changing the world.
And that story, it keeps inspiring. The spirit of rock and roll is still out there.
If you're ever in Memphis, go to Sun Studio, stand in that space, feel the history, go back to the birth of rock and roll.
Listen to the music. Really listen. You'll hear echoes of Sun in so many songs, so many artists.
That's a great point. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Sun Records.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the music playing.